Well, we have Ashley Tison on the call here with me this afternoon. And Ashley, I really appreciate your time. But before we get started, I want to send everybody to a special landing page that you've created for the audience because and there's quite a bit of resources and some great offers there for people. So go to ozpros.com/REI mastermind. Then you're going to find out what Ashley and his team do, but they primarily not only focus on how to reduce your taxes, of course, which is always a great thing, but what the topic of the day is opportunity zones. And we're going to kind of do a opportunity zone 101 here today. And Ashley's going to bear with me as I ask some pretty basic questions, but I think we need to start there. But Ashley, I really appreciate this.
Well, thanks for having me on, Jack. It's a pleasure to be here today.
So I'm going to start things off because, we've heard a lot about, especially in the news regarding opportunity zones, but we also hear of gentrification and a few other things. So I think we're going to try to bust a couple of those myths here today as well, maybe. Sure. But could we kind of define what an opportunity zone is and why a city or any place would take an advantage or designate an opportunity zone?
So in the Tax Cut and Jobs Act of 2017, in the 1,700 pages that they had, they snuck in these 3 pages of legislation and that are called opportunity zones. And so what it allowed governors to do was to designate up to 25% of their low-income census tracts as opportunity zones. And so each governor then got to choose and pick 25% of their low-income census tracts, wherever those were, to become opportunity zones. And if you invest into an opportunity zone, you get to defer capital gains. The first, so if you had appreciated stock or appreciated crypto, or you sold a business and you generated substantial capital gains, you can take that capital gain and you can put it into a qualified opportunity fund. And all that has to be is just a partnership. And then you can make investments in these areas. And that investment can either be real estate or it can be an operating business. And after a 10-year hold, you're going to be able to exit that investment tax-free. So in 3 pages of code, the legislator was basically able to accomplish what no other place-based economic incentive has ever done, which was, number 1, it got the attention of private capital. Number 2, it got private capital off the sidelines. And number 3 is that it got it to be patient. And so I gotta tip my hat to these guys, is that, in this bipartisan legislation, which it just happened to get enacted, under President Trump's tenure, it created a program that has actually encouraged private capital to invest into areas that have historically been underinvested in. And so there's 8,700 of these opportunity zones across the United States. They run the gamut and in all of the U.S. territories as well. So the island of Puerto Rico is basically one gigantic opportunity zone because of the hurricanes that happened there. And so if you invest into those zones, or if you basically operate a business out of those zones, you qualify for this unbelievable tax incentive.
So, that's interesting that this happened in 2017, and you would have had to, you've been in business longer than that, right?
Yeah. So I, so a little bit of background on me. I'm an attorney. I try to practice law as little as possible, but I like to call myself a reformed attorney because of that. But I started practicing law with a big firm. I was a commercial real estate developer and tenant-in-common syndicator. So I did a bunch of syndication exercises, and we distributed our product through a nationwide, network of broker dealers. And then I, when the real estate market crashed in 2008, 2009, I went back into practicing law and built up a mergers and acquisition firm, but sold it so that I could help business owners put more money in their pocket by saving on taxes and by improving their business processes. And so when I did that, I started really focusing on tax mitigation strategies and what the really ultra high net worth families do as it relates to their wealth building strategies. And as a part of that, I was at a CLE and I heard a guy talking about the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. And he mentioned it. It was after lunch and he was kind of droning on and he mentioned it. And I ran him down in the hall afterwards and I was like, hey, opportunity zones. Did I hear what I thought you heard? I was like, that sounds like private equity in 1031 got married. And he's like, oh yeah. And they had a beautiful baby named opportunity zones. And so I was like, all right, let's pop up a website and let's see what happens. And 2 weeks later, 150 inbound leads and $150 million worth of capital looking for deals. I was like, okay, we're on to something here, and let's go all in. Let's learn this stuff, right? And it was just a little bit of a twist for me because I was doing a lot of the stuff that you do inside of an opportunity zone anyhow. I just had to really dive into the regs and really dive into those in 2019 when they finally came out.
Right. Well, you're almost living an example there. We've all read Rich Dad Poor Dad, and it talks about taking advantage of these opportunities that come up at the time. So I got to give you credit. I mean, you're living that actual adage there where you saw the opportunity and you threw up a page really quick to just see if there was a market appetite and test it out. And you really pivoted really quickly. A lot of people don't do that.
Yeah, it wasn't difficult for me because, at the time we were doing succession planning as part of grooming businesses for sale. And then we were helping them exit. And then we were doing the tax mitigation on the back end of that. And it was amazing that, I'd be calling people on the phone and be like, hey, do you have a succession plan in place? And, I'd be leaving this as a voicemail on their message. And I could get people to call me back. I'd be like, hey, let me give you an hour worth of my time because I can help you put together a succession plan and really figure out how you can make your business more valuable and then how you can put more money of that in your pocket and really build generational wealth for your family. And people weren't interested in that. And so what really clued me in and what really kind of stuck out for me inside of that process is that, man, you can be diligent like crazy. And if you just don't have something that resonates with people, right, that's what you really got to focus on is you got to focus on some story that resonates with folks. Because that story didn't resonate people. Hey, you're going to die someday and you need to plan ahead of time, right? Mm-hmm. No, nobody wanted to do that. But we talked about opportunity zones and we're like, hey, we can help you build your business, make it more valuable, and we can show you all the things that you could do inside of an opportunity zone. And then all of a sudden the phone was ringing off the hook and people, we had all this inbound traffic and things were going crazy. And so it's all about that right story. And so thank goodness. And, we were blessed with getting the right story at the right time.
Mm-hmm. So these opportunity zones almost sound a little too good to be true to a certain extent. So can you give us what are a couple of the downsides that people should be aware of associated with this?
There's definitely nuances. So number one, there's time frames associated with when you have to put your capital gains into a fund. There's time frames on when you have to move the money from your fund down into a qualified opportunity zone business. And then there's time frames for, when you have to invest the money into an actual deal. And then once you're looking for deals, whether that's a operating business or whether that's a real estate deal, there's nuances to some of the things that you have to comply with. One of those is that it either has to be original use or it has to be substantially improved. And in order to substantially improve something, you have to double the basis of the value of the building. And I don't want to get into the weeds on that too much, but it effectively means that whatever is there, you have to put enough money in to double that. And that could be tricky if you're buying something that's existing that's nice. And so it's just understanding those nuances. And so if you've got a guide, if you've got somebody that can help you along the way, it makes it so that it's doable, and it makes it so that effectively anybody can do it. And that's what OZPros.com was set up to be. Our passion is to democratize access to this thing, to not just make it for the big funds out there, but if somebody has a capital gain and they want to make a difference, that they can do it themselves, and they can do their own self-directed, captive opportunity zone fund, and do their part in making a difference in these areas, because it's Main Street America that's the backbone of our economy. And we wanted to bring Wall Street level sophistication in the form of this incentive down to Main Street America.
Mm-hmm. So there's kind of a movement, I mentioned at the beginning of this episode regarding gentrification, and as developers are moving into these areas, it could potentially remove some of that low income housing. Do you find that there's some conflict there, or maybe this is a myth that we need to bust here?
I mean, I think that gentrification is happening everywhere all the time, regardless of whether it's in an opportunity zone or not, and that it's an issue that everybody's attempting to address and to try and figure out the best solution for it. Unfortunately, that happens whether you're in an opportunity zone or not. And so instead of saying, okay, how can we stop gentrification by basically keeping this place a slum, right?
Mm.
Let's not do that, right? Let's figure out a way to where we can, get people, the value associated with their property, and we can figure out an alternative solution for them. Now, one of the challenges inside of the Opportunity Zone program, and I will acknowledge this, right, is that unfortunately, the way that the final regs came out is that it's very difficult for somebody that has property in the zone that they've owned prior to 2017 to be able to hold on to that property and to participate in the upside of the program. Because there's this circular cash flow thing that the IRS talked about, that if you sell and then reinvest into the person that bought you, that they deem that circular cash flow. We've come up with some creative ways to solve that problem, to make it so that people can actually, stay involved in the deal, but you got to get creative on it. And so one of the things that we've stated, and that, I'm in a number of different organizations. I'm in the Economic Innovation Group Forum, and I'm also in the Novogradic Opportunity Zones Working Group. And we regularly interact with Treasury and with the legislators about, hey, this is a problem that we need to fix. And one of those things is this exact item about gentrification. And, we're all parties are actively working on doing that. And so hopefully, and you never know, this actually might be a possibility for us to come up with an innovative solution to that that we can maybe even apply outside of opportunity zones.
Sure. Well, in like some larger cities, does the opportunity zone kind of break the concept of rent control and a few other things?
So, I think that, inside of the dynamic of rent control and that kind of drill, right, of larger cities, that's, mainly focused on, once again, trying to kind of provide that affordable housing. One of the interesting things about the opportunity zone is that because it allows for an economic incentive, because it allows for you to basically, it's not creating money out of thin air, but it'll take a good deal and it'll make it investor nirvana. And so within that, it allows you to get a little bit more creative about doing deals that you otherwise wouldn't necessarily do. So I've seen a ton of deals relative to naturally occurring workforce housing. And so, but for the economic incentive associated with the opportunity zone, I don't know that those deals would be getting done. And so I don't think that this is going to obviate the need for rent control, or, that people should be really focused on doing rent control in the zones. What's really interesting and what's really fascinating is that the lion's share of opportunity zone people that I interact with on a daily basis, and we've had over 1,000 strategy calls at OZPros. We set up an online community called the OZWorks group, and people can join that, and it's a membership-based deal that has over 300 members in it at this point. And as I interact with all of these folks, I have yet to meet somebody that's really not focused on what I call the fifth pillar and the fifth dimension of wealth building, which I think that everybody should really be focused on, is impact and purpose, and investing on purpose with the goal of having impact. And by very definition, if you're investing in an opportunity zone, you are having impact because these areas have typically been underinvested in. And then on top of that, the stories and kind of the passion and the heart motive of the folks that are actually doing these deals is such that they're actually making a difference in a way that's, it makes it so that it's kind of the private markets moving in to solve some of these public needs, which is the ideal solution, right? So as a, kind of a Keynesian economist, right? I'm interested in the private sector figuring out solutions to these big public problems. And whether it's a form of a partnership with government or just doing it on its own, that's the ideal solution instead of having to regulate. And so it's really been cool to see how many people inside of opportunity zones and how many stories there are about people that are doing well by doing good. And that's our mantra here.
No, that's interesting. Especially in this day and age when we're kind of constantly talked about, you're constantly, frankly, preached to the concept of living with a purpose or having a job with a purpose or finding your purpose. I mean, that says a lot if you can focus on your investing with a purpose.
Yeah, it really does. So, you had a guest on one of your podcasts. I actually really enjoyed it, Blake Templeton, and he talked about the 3 dimensions of investing and kind of wealth generation. And I would argue that and I love that. And I just want to kind of tack on to that that inside of this and inside of opportunity zones, it's like the 5th dimension. The 4th dimension being that tax advantaged benefit and tax advantaged kick and really getting aggressive, right? So high net worth and ultra high net worth people, that's what they're really focused on. So they're doing the cost segregation studies like he talked about on your episode. But opportunity zones, it's really cool because after a 10-year hold, you get a step up in basis to fair market value, which eliminates depreciation recapture. So inside of that cost segregation study, if you sell prior to the depreciation window catching up, you have to pay ordinary income on the sale. In the opportunity zone, you do not. And so that is a massive, massive benefit for the opportunity zones. On top of that, there's lots of different federal programs that are tied with incentives based upon opportunity zones themselves. And there's lots of grants and other types of things that you can get as an investor in an opportunity zone. And we're actually working on the 5th dimension with the National Christian Foundation and with the Impact Foundation relative to that impact person, because I think that that's the key piece, right? Is that if you can do all 4 of those things and do them well, if you have an impact story associated with that and a heart and a passion behind it, number one, it's going to make it way more interesting for you. And you're going to be way more involved in it. You're going to be way more excited about it. Number 2, it's going to bring investors to the mix with the same passion and the same idea. Number 3, you're actually going to do some good, right? And I think that that's the key thing. And so when you can pull all 5 of those together, right, and what we're trying to do inside of the NCF element is actually make it so that people can donate to a charity. They can set up a donor advised fund if they want, and they can actually invest through that as well. And it opens up a whole nother realm of both charitable giving strategies, which is a huge tax strategy that we employ for really wealthy folks. And it also allows you to tap investors that might be interested in investing that way. So that's what we do at OZPros, is that we help people strategize around all of those things, and we help them actually do their vision, right? So we give them the tools that they need. We vest them with that. We get them out there actually doing opportunity zones. And then we're there with a mastermind group to help support them along the way, to answer their questions, to make sure they're in compliance, and to rock and roll on that.
Yeah. You remind me of a couple books when you were talking about that. Start with why,
Yep.
that's one. And if you have, there was a recent one too called The Red Thread.
Huh.
Where you're making that
I'm writing that one down.
You're making that definition, or you're defining that why. And the whole point of it, right, is we typically react because out of fear or because of pain. But
That's
if
right.
we can establish that why to a strong enough, not only will we override, essentially kind of short circuit our fear response, but will, what do they say? if you want to move people, you have to be moved first.
That's exactly right.
It's that aspect. So taking a moment and defining that really does help. So I just want to.
It does, and it makes it so that it makes it fun to get up in the morning, right? Because you get up and you're excited about something, and we kid around about it all the time, and we're actually getting these made, these OZ superhero capes, where I challenge everybody, right? Whether it's in the context of opportunity zones or whatever your passion is, throw your superhero cape on each and every day and go do what you're passionate about. Actually implement it. And if you're not excited about something, it's tough to do that. And so, to your point, you got to get fired up. And then in so doing, you're going to fire people up just by very definition of it rubbing off on them.
Yep. If you don't, it's always just going to be another job.
And I am not interested in another job.
So I wanted to remind everybody again, another time, ozpros.com/REI mastermind. I'll make sure to have that link in the show notes to make it easy for everybody to click through. I wanted to take a moment here now and help these smaller investors, and a lot of them are listening to this show. So first of all, do you have to be living in the state or within the city where this opportunity zone resides, or can you be a distance investor?
Absolutely not. You can invest anywhere into any of the opportunity zones, in any place. So it doesn't matter where you live. It doesn't matter where you work. If you've got so unfortunately, they made it so that you have to have capital gains to make your initial investment. But I mean, we've been successful at generating capital gains for people. We've actually created some NFTs and that kind of thing that they were able to buy. And then through a peer-to-peer group, they sold them and they were actually able to generate a capital gain. And then, or we're able to take a very small capital gain and be able to use that as their seed investment into their fund. And then they're able to bring in non-capital gains to the extent that they need more cash for whatever investment that it is that they're doing. But that's pretty much the only, hamstring, if you will, right? Is that it doesn't matter where you live. It just matters that you have a capital gain. And we're usually pretty successful in getting creative with that.
Have you found, but you said there were like 8,700. It was like a lot of opportunity zones right now. Have you found like certain parts of the country better for this strategy than others?
Well, just by very definition, right? There's areas that have historically received the lion's share of private investment, right? And that's historically been New York, Boston, California, and Texas, maybe Florida. And so not surprisingly, the opportunity zones that are actually in those areas, those have received the lion's share of the investment. There's some pending legislation right now that's going to revise kind of how the opportunity zones were selected. And I think that if that goes through, that's going to revise that, and we'll actually probably see significantly more cash going into some of the more tertiary markets, which we're starting to see as a whole, because, those markets are unbelievably kind of overinflated. And so a lot of folks are realizing that as an investment strategy, the tertiary markets make sense. And so, okay, well, now that we know we're looking for tertiary markets, let's look for opportunity zones that are, getting going as tertiary markets. And the really cool thing about opportunity zones is that it becomes kind of a rallying point for being able to get word out about your market. So I was just on, we have every Friday at Ozworks Group, we have like at noon, we have a group session. And we were talking about an event that we're going to be doing in Rockport, Texas, the first weekend in October. And I've got the OZMobile, which is a 38-foot Thor RV that's got OZPros.com on the side, and it's wrapped with OZMobile on the back. And I bought it because the back of it's got a garage, and we shoot videos out of that. And we're taking the OZMobile down to Texas, and we're highlighting this, this coastal city of Rockport, Texas, that has done an excellent job of really taking advantage of the opportunity zones, learning about them, getting their economic development guys knowledgeable about it, educating their business owners about it, that kind of thing. And though that community now is getting national attention via this event that we're having, and us being able to get the word out about them and being able to invite, established funds down there to look at the different deals that they have going on. And opportunity zones have been a rallying point for that community. So they've lined up, the economic development guys. They lined up the community development block grant guys. They lined up the different grants and resources that are available out there. The SBA, the Small Business Development Center, they all synchronized around opportunity zones. And now they're able to use that word kind of similar to how I used it, right, in order to launch this business. And they're utilizing that to get people's attention. And so I think that that's one of the coolest things that's happened as a result of opportunity zones.
Yeah, it's really neat how and interesting how different communities react so differently to these opportunities.
Yes.
You talked, you focused on that one versus, if there's so many opportunities available, but different, and we keep saying opportunity zones and communities, and starting to lose meaning here, but it's just,
I'm so sick of the word opportunity. It's not even funny because there's so many opportunities and opportunity zones, qualified opportunity funds and that kind of thing. So yeah, it gets a little overworked in my world, but to your point, there's, and I think that that's kind of true about anything, right? You get out of something what you put into it. And the communities that have invested into this, and the communities that have said, hey, you know what, let's learn this thing. Let's throw resources at it. And then the ones that have really done well, it's because one person, right, has said, I'm willing to lead the charge. I'm going to pick up the phone and I'm going to call Ashley. I'm going to call Jimmy Atkinson. I'm going to call Chris Cooley at Ozworks Group. And we're going to start a conversation. We're going to start a dialogue, and we're going to see if there's a way that we can utilize the resources that are out there in order to make a difference in our community. So there's a guy named Jim Spencer in Bluefield, West Virginia, that did exactly that. And he basically became the opportunity zone czar for that area. As a result, he's got like 5 separate, massive deals that have come to that little city of Bluefield, West Virginia, which is basically on the way from Charlotte to Richmond. Actually, it's not Richmond, but it's on the way to, you're going north on 77, right? It's right there on the interstate. But, unless you've driven on 77, you've probably never heard of Bluefield, West Virginia. But lo and behold, he's got these massive deals coming there because as one person, he decided that he was going to make a difference. And I think that that's the really cool thing, number one, about our country, but number two, about this program, is that one person really can make a difference if they decide that they want to.
So as a small investor, you talked about seed funding and a few other things. If, let's say, somebody's getting into this, as this concept has really grabbed a hold of them and they wanted to get involved, would you recommend them seeking out like a syndication or something that's in that area, or should they try to tackle it on their own? How would you suggest maybe somebody start in
so I think a lot of that depends on how inclined they are to want to manage their own investment. And so if they're really interested in getting hands-on in actively doing a deal, whether that's a real estate deal, right? So the great thing is, in opportunity zone, you can pretty much do anything. So from single family rentals, right? If you wanted to go and buy one and rehab it and then rent it out or Airbnb it or whatever, we got tons of people that have done that. Or if you want to, start a business and you think that it's going to take off and then it's going to have massive appreciation, if you do it in an opportunity zone and you start it with a capital gain seed money, after 10 years, all of it's going to be tax-free for you and your investors. But if you're not so inclined to where you're not wanting to really kind of get in and do the actual thing that you're going to do, and you're more of an investor, then absolutely. There's tons of great national funds that are out there that allow you to basically place your money in and to get the benefit. And we regularly interact with those. We guide people through that, process and that strategy. We do exactly that on a strategy call. We find out what's important for them, and we iron that out, and we come up with, recommendations, introduction, and, just general guidance about, okay, which way do you want to go? Do you want to do this yourself? And if you do, there's a fair learning curve if you're starting from scratch. Here's the resources in order to make that as fast as possible. And here's the resources to help you get set up and get going. That's what we do. And then if they're not inclined and they're like, yeah, you know what, that sounds like a lot of compliance stuff, and I'm not really interested in kind of doing my own deal anyhow. What about just a fund to invest in? We go, okay, what's your pleasure, right? Are you into multifamily? Are you into retail? Are you into industrial? Do you want Airbnbs? Do you want do you want operating businesses? Because that's one of the great things about this program is that you can invest into high growth startup operating businesses. And we know a lot of funds that are doing that. Do you like hospitality? Do you like, so we've got a fund right now that's, it's 10 hotels in Puerto Rico. And, we're actively involved in, rocking and rolling with those, with some unbelievably undervalued assets that are going to just crush it because of the stacked tax incentives that are available in Puerto Rico. And people love that because they're like, oh, wow, I can make a passive investment into a fund and I can go and vacation in Puerto Rico and write off my trip as due diligence. And I'm like, absolutely, let's go. And, or we've got another fund that we raised that's, that's actually acquiring raw land, big chunks of raw land as part of a levered land play where we're doing RV parks and kind of higher end hunting communities. So, and operating farms, like farm to fork hunting establishments. And, so there's people that are fired up about that because they're like, oh, wow, man, I'd love to interact with that type of asset. I get, really stoked about tiny houses and RVs and, somewhere where I can actually go and I can, escape the confines of the city and I can unplug and I can retreat with my family. That's what my big picture, right? So like my real passion, you asked me, you asked what's about impact. That's what I get up in the morning to do, is that I want to help people retreat and build generational values along with their generational wealth. And I love to do that in place-based settings where they can kind of get away from the internet and they can connect with each other and they can really talk about the stuff that's going to actually inculcate that value transfer.
Well, I just can't emphasize this enough, Ashley. This is a great example of how, one of the taglines of this show is that you can either put in a 10,000 hours and become an expert, or you can already learn from those people that have made that investment. And that's the case here. There's a lot of moving parts associated with these opportunity zones, including not only, like you said, there was like 8,700 opportunity zones. I'm sure there's a map somewhere where you can maybe see these things, but to compare and contrast and find the best fit for the individual, I think it is wise for somebody to take a moment or make a small investment with you and your team to just kind of like level set and build out your team, build out your network, if you will, and get some expertise behind you. This was just really eye-opening here today, Ashley. I really appreciate it. Before I let you go, I do have some rapid fire questions, and then we'll close this out if you're ready.
Absolutely.
So what you're not allowed to use Rich Dad Poor Dad, because I'm as far as I'm concerned, that's like going into a guitar shop and trying to play Stairway to Heaven. That song's been played too many times.
I love that. They love it when you do that.
What book would you recommend everybody should read, whether it's business, investing, or otherwise?
Traction by Gino Wickman. And we run our business on Traction, and we invest in businesses that run on Traction as well. And so, in the businesses that we invest in that don't, they soon do. And I can't recommend it enough. We've got a fractional integrator, a guy named Casey Cavell, that literally turned around our company and gave us the Rocket Fuel, which is another book by Gino Wickman as well, that allowed us to launch.
Yep, I got it sitting on the shelf back here. It's one of those things, like you said, you either start off right with it or you eventually have to adapt to it, and that can be painful.
Yeah, and I mean, for us, we didn't start off with it, but we were like, you know what, it's time. I tried to self-implement, and that was like, it's basically like trying to train yourself, right? And or coach yourself. Some people can do it, but I was like, all right, I'm going to invest in a coach. I coach people regularly day to day on this opportunity zone stuff. We've made a business out of it, and I'm smart enough, kind of like a lawyer who represents himself as a fool for a client. I was like, a coach that's trying to coach himself is probably not the best coach. So I'm going to hire a coach. And I did that. And he helped us execute on the Traction in the EOS implementation, which has been great. It's been a game changer.
So what was the biggest mistake you've made in your life, and what did you learn from it?
Wow. It's
I
funny
have to hit you hard on these.
yeah, that was a good one. And so I did on the other episodes that I listened to, I don't remember these popping up, but now we talking business or we talking personal?
Business. Well, we typically focus on business, but if you want to share personal, that's fine too.
So it's funny is that I think they're kind of tied together. Is that as I look back on my mistakes, the ones that I think that that have been the worst is when I've made a decision hastily. Right. So I'm D on the disc profile and I want the information. And then I'm like, I'm not afraid to make a decision. But when I've done that and I've done it hastily, either because of fear, right? Fear of missing out, or because I'm like, okay, this seems like it's a good idea. Let's rock and roll with it without kind of really thinking about it and really unpacking it. Particularly if it's a substantial investment of cash or whatever. When I've done that hastily, I've regretted it. One of the things that that when we started this thing and we popped up the webpage on opportunity zones, I talked to my team and I was like, hey, I think that we should create an educational product and a coaching system to help people do this thing. And somebody on my team was like, hey, I think we ought to do a product. If you had a product that that you could put together, I could sell that like crazy. And so based upon that, I was like, okay. And I kind of knew in my gut. And if I would have really taken some time on that, I probably would have figured out that was a bad idea, particularly because the final regs weren't out. And so our first foray was that we created our own fund. And it was doing a roll up of construction cladding companies. And we took that fund out and we couldn't raise a nickel, namely because the final regs hadn't come out and people were not comfortable investing in an operating business yet as an opportunity zone play. And so that caused us, right? So, substantial investment of time and money into getting that done. That caused us to then have to reboot. And the good news about that is that I was able to successfully take all of that stuff that we did. So the pro forma and pitch deck and the process that we went through to get that done, the PPM and all of the financial modeling and, the ins and outs of the opportunity zone that we had to learn. I was like, okay, I was doing it along the way in order to keep the lights on. I was like, hey, we got to go full steam on this. So we need to figure out some processes to where we can serve this up to many on the lessons that we learned and how to do this thing. And so that's what we do. We walk people through exactly that for anybody that wants to syndicate or anybody that wants to do it on their own. We're like, okay, this is the stuff you need to be concerned about. And so we've become the OZ Sherpa, right? Guiding people on their own opportunity zone journey. But it was a school of hard knocks because I made a hasty decision about that. And then, it basically cost us like probably 7 to 8 months and a lot of money.
Well, what was the best piece of business advice you've ever received?
And I continue to get this. I think that it's focus, right? Pick one thing and really run that to ground. And, and this is also from our implementer, our EOS implementer, Casey, he said, you're way more likely to die from indigestion than you are from lack of opportunity. So focus on the 3 to 4 things and really, really do those well. And that's really tough for me because I'm visionary off the charts and I love, kind of coming up with creative ideas and solutions and that kind of thing. Which is one of the reasons why I love doing strategy calls, because it allows me to creatively problem solve and kind of get that need met for other people instead of taking it to my team every day and being like, hey, there's this great new thing out there that we got to try. And so focus and execution on that focus has been that's probably been the greatest business advice that I've gotten.
Yeah. And as entrepreneurs, I think we're all destined for that. Any kind of shiny object syndrome. I mean, we're always like trying to find the next best thing when the gold might be right in front of us.
It's that story about diamonds in your backyard, right? Where the guy's like, oh, these diamond things. And he goes searching all over Africa and he ends up dying penniless, somewhere on the continent. And the guy that buys the farm comes in and he's like, He walks up and he looks at this thing that's on the, his fireplace, and he's like, holy cow. He's like, you guys have these? He's like, where'd you find this? And he's like, oh, there's a big pile of them out in the stream out back. Right. This is his wife telling this guy this. And he's like, well, that's the biggest diamond that I've ever seen. And, this guy was out looking all over the continent for something that was literally right in his backyard.
Yeah. Well, so what's the worst piece of business advice you've ever received?
Wow. That's got
to give you a loaded question.
Yeah, exactly. I think that, well, what's funny is that, I'm going to go back to that, generate a product before we're ready and before the market's ready, right? So go down the road of, hey, let's build this thing and they'll come, right? Instead of what we did when we originally started the thing, which was a micro test, right? Micro test and see if it works. Micro test the next thing, see if it works. Instead, we were like, okay, yeah, this thing's going to be great. And then we're going to build this thing and then we're going to be able to sell the mess out of it. Well, that did not work. And so based upon that and, learning from that, I, now walk people through, hey, do your pro forma and pitch deck, put together your idea, and then go and sell that to who you think you're going to be able to get cash from. And then once you have a soft commit, then let's spend the money on the next phases of it. And then let's expand it and that kind of thing. But don't go full bore, field of dreams and think that build it and they'll come.
Yeah. Well, and lastly, is there a question or concept you wished we would have covered here today?
So I think that the one thing that I would say is that the question I wish you would have asked is like, how can people learn about this for free, right? So inside of our deal, we've tried to get the price down as low as possible. And I think that we've done a great job of that. But there is a fee-based interaction, right? Because we're trying to get it out to as many people as possible, but we got to make a living too. But we've actually put out a ton of free resources via our YouTube channel, which is OZPros. And if people want to go explore that and they can, hit a like and they can subscribe to the channel, that will enable us to continue to be able to release out that free content, because our passion is to democratize access to not just opportunity zones, but all types of tax mitigation strategies, because I believe it is each individual's civic duty to pay as little taxes as possible. And we're living that out every day.
Yeah. Well, I can't thank you enough, Ashley. This has been great. Again, ozpros.com/REI mastermind. You're welcome back. I hope you'll take me up on that offer.
I'd love to come back and would love to interact with your guests and your listeners, and looking forward to visiting here again.